Welcome to Presente, a space and community that vibes on being in the moment, something we are relearning how to do in a fast moving world.
We are excited to be part of a growing movement that talks about topics that we feel haven't been talked about in our Latin culture and womanhood.
Be present with us. Take a pause and break down societal norms.
Redefine the meaning of existing. Welcome to Presente, the podcast. Passion is the soul core of Latinos. We are the fire. Our voices are unique, and we have a light that moves through the universe. We are guided from our past ancestors, grounding ourselves in the root of the earth. Our ancestors fought so we, the present souls, remain, to continue breaking cycles past and be spiritually awakened in our power.
Durante el mes de la herencia hispana, con orgullo y mucho amor, felicidades a nuestros latinos.
Latina Enough, Spanish Language Part 1. Latino, Latina, Latinx. Enough. First off, this topic is definitely not an easy one to talk about, but still important for our Latino communities. What exactly constitutes being Latino, and when is it okay or enough? Is it the beat of our rhythm and songs, like listening to salsa, merengue, bachata, soca, música folclórica? Or for some who still know the indigenous songs, the sazón that goes to making moro or arroz con gandules? Is it pásame la Inca Cola, mixing a little Spanglish here and there, speaking our language? We are the beautiful shades of the rainbow. We are the spice and life. We are the motions of the seas. Somos Latinos.
Yo soy latina, pura dominicana y bonita. Mis padres del Cibao, nacida allá, sangre dominicana, pura te digo. But I'm raised in New York, East Side girl in the heart of the city. Work, school, play with my own versions of New York made. I've been underestimated, misinterpreted for misrepresenting Dominican talk. The one with the swiftness, kind of loud and quick to catch. And because of it, I was told I sound like a white girl. And instead, I'm not Dominican. That's harsh and well mistaken. I am, forever will be, Dominican and Latina enough.
Dang, girl. Sorry that happened, but happy you have persevered despite the comments. You are fire, and I'm not just saying that because your moon sign is in it. You're still here to follow your true north. Also, same. Most of my childhood, it's always been like, well, prove to me that you speak Spanish or are Latina. It's almost like other people would be so bothered that I was also Hispanic, but I didn't look it. But we'll save that topic for another day on Presente. Or that I too spoke like a white girl. By the way, what are we supposed to sound like? If I did not speak Spanish, how would that have gone?
What are we? Somos Latinos. I am so glad that I can speak Spanish. I am so glad that I am bilingual. I can fluently read, write, speak, and understand Spanish. And although my Spanish is nowhere near perfect, I can totally hold my own and get by. My grandma, who I call mommy, always, and I mean always, made it clear and made it her obligation for me to know both languages. Thank you, mommy. I want to do the same for my kids as well, no doubt about it. In fact, my daughter is half Brazilian, and her dad and his side of the family speaks Portuguese. So hopefully she can be trilingual. However, taking it way back now, I grew up in a Spanish household and attended public school. My first few years in school, kindergarten, first grade, I attended ESL and speech classes. ESL stood for English as a Secondary Language, and I was an ESL kid, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed practicing and reading out loud. I loved it so much that as I got older and transferred elementary schools, I enrolled in a reading competition where you select a book and memorize it word for word, and then read it out loud in front of everyone. I did it for 2 years in a row, I believe, and I came in second place. Later on, in the fifth grade, I, out of all the students in the graduating class, was chosen to announce the graduating class. I memorized every student's name, full name. That was easy. I was dedicated, and the truth is, I didn't realize back then how much I enjoy public speaking, storytelling, and connecting. I thank ESL for that and all the tutors and teachers, professors, mentors, voice coaches, my parents, and telenovelas with my mom for all of that. And for little Jenny and her dreams and gifts, I shall continue the conversation.
As a kid, I asked my dad once at a diner, I may have been 7 and 8 or 8, and was like, Dad, what are we? My awareness was widening, I guess, that I was something other than just a kid or myself, was becoming like, hey, there is more to me. I was learning about ethnicity. I used to travel to Honduras as a young kid. Maybe I was 3, then again 6, still too young to notice my roots. Just that we spoke 2 languages at home. Then at 7, 8, I discovered that I am more than just a girl from Brooklyn. By the way, shout outs to my 90s childhood home, Coney Island. Back to my dad. I said, Dad, what kind of Spanish are we? Are we Puerto Rican? Only because the kids in my class, other Latinos, spoke about their ethnicities or the languages that they spoke in class. I asked that so innocently. I assumed that answer, by the way, because other kids were saying, well, I'm Mexican, I'm Puerto Rican, etc., and spoke the same language like my parents did at home. So I was like, me too? My dad said, you're American because you were born in New York, but I am from Peru and mommy is from Honduras. That's why you speak 2 languages like some of your school friends. You are Latina Americana. By the way, I mentioned this in another episode, but explaining where Peru and Honduras was on a map, that is another tall tale. But let's say once we had Spanish classes in middle school, the kids became more aware that other Latin countries were out there. I felt seen. It felt good not to over explain my background anymore. I am proud of my roots, my culture, and background. Go Central and South American energy. Oh, and according to Google, there are 33 Latin countries now. Holla!
Hey everyone, I'm Kimmy Dole and I am on Presente.
Joining us here today for our episode on Latina Enough is Kimmy Dole. She is a Latina that is very involved in the world of pop culture, here representing her Honduran roots as well as her writing skills that are displayed through Pop Sugar Juntos. If you haven't checked out her writing and her articles, please do. Kimmy, thank you so much for joining us on Presente. Please let us know a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and your professional background.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here. So I am Kimmy Dole, or Dole if people are saying it in Spanish. And I am originally born in Honduras, but I was raised in Brooklyn, New York. And yeah, I work in media. I'm a writer. I guess a little bit of a Latino pop culture expert kind of deal.
Yes, you are an expert in all things pop cultura, if I must
Yes.
say. I love reading your articles. Every now and then you're pretty much giving insight into what goes on, behind the scenes as well as through mainstream, like what's popping out there. Your most recent article was about Shakira and her new single, Soltera, I believe it is. I love what you had to say about there, and including your article even before that, which was about the heavy backlash that Latin actors receive. For instance, Sofia Vergara is one of the main sources that has received backlash despite all her success. And then we have someone like Jenna Ortega on the other end of the spectrum that is Latina but doesn't speak Spanish.
Yes, I actually really love that article because it's true. You know, Sofia Vergara has had like a career spanning over 20 years. She's been a host, an actress, she's been in commercials, she's modeled, she's done so many things. And she has complained that she doesn't really get booked for jobs because her accent is pretty heavy. I find that to not really be the case when it comes to other accents that are not Latinos. So, you know, you always see like people don't mind a British accent or an Australian accent or even like anything of like European descent. But like when it comes to a Latino accent, we're kind of categorized as like a maid or it comes off as like you're not smart enough or, you know, just less than. And that's absolutely not the case. So, you know, it was a really good article. I thought, you know, it really resonates with a lot of us because, you know, we have parents who have accents, you know, or tios, tias, and family members that have accents. But that's also even the case for someone like Rosie Perez, who's very American, and she has a New York or New Yorican accent, and she also gets typecast for kind of like the quote unquote like ghetto roles, or you know, just gets typecast because of her accent. So it doesn't even matter sometimes whether or not you're born here, but if you have an accent that's of Latino descent, you just get thrown into a certain box that other, you know, white actors and actresses might not get put in.
Interesting. You mentioned the term typecast. Was that what you
Mhm.
said? And I've never heard of that term. I find it very interesting that it exists, especially now in 2024 when the Latin population has grown immensely and you have people that are American and Latin American. And not for nothing, but to many of us, our advantage is we're bilingual, you know? So while we're getting criticized in Hollywood or in the film industry, whatever it is, one thing we have a secret, you know, thing in our back pocket where we can say, hey, well, we speak Spanish and English. And I think
Yeah.
that's amazing. I think that Sofia Vergara has stand her ground and continue to just push barriers. It's unfortunate, but I guess this is a reality of America.
Yeah, I mean, it is sad because she, like I said, she's had such a long career and to still get placed in these boxes. And she's proven herself with shows like Modern Family was an insane hit and it went on for I think like 10 or seasons or something like that. But they swept all of the awards at all the, you know, they swept through all the award shows. And yet for her, she still wasn't able to get a lot of roles, even after the success of that show. And when she did get nominated to an Emmy, it was because she spoke in her native language, which was Spanish. So it's just, you know, it's just sad to see that we're still kind of having to prove ourselves when it shouldn't be like that.
I don't know if you saw the where America Ferrera was saying, who's actually Honduran herself, and she was saying, you know, that Latin actors were, you know, we can play multi-complex roles and that, you know, we shouldn't be stereotyped into neat little boxes like society likes to put us in. I actually said that in the podcast for a previous episode. I'm like, I'm not a Pokemon. Stop trying to put me in a Pokeball space. We can also play these roles whether we have accents or not. There's a multifacet to being a human being. You know, Jennifer was correct. You know, she said that, you know, we are bilingual, so we have the duality to change, you know, speaking Spanish and speaking English as well. But I'm glad to see that she got her Emmy, Sofia Vergara. I hope she gets more roles because, like she said in Modern Family, you know, she's like, you don't know how smart I am in Spanish.
Yeah, that was definitely like one of the most memorable lines that she's had on that show. But yeah, even with the movie Barbie, like you said, America Ferrera, who is of Honduran descent, she didn't play Barbie even like she just played like a regular human, and there wasn't, at least I didn't think that there was any Latina representation of Barbies. Like we had Issa Rae was a Barbie, and but I don't think that there were any Latina Barbies. And while there was representation of a real human who was Latina, I didn't get a Latina Barbie, and I was kind of sad to not see that and not feel included, because representation again is so important. And the population of everybody knows at least one Hispanic person. Like we are a big population in this country, and yet we are underrepresented in the media. And when we are represented, a lot of times we're like the maids, or like we're not up to par, but we're not held to like the same standards as the white counterparts, the white actresses and actors. We don't get to play the same roles, and we don't get access to play the same roles.
Now actually that you mentioned that, and rethinking about watching the Barbie movie, I didn't realize that there were no Latina Barbies on that movie. You're right. There was only America Ferrera, which played the human. But even though she played this human, I want to say she probably gave the most powerful speech to a woman.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In that movie.
That wasn't to take away from her part in the movie, and she did have like a lead role in the movie. It was just that I just noticed that aspect.
I know. It's like, where's the Barbie? Like, where's Barbie Teresa? I had Barbie Teresa growing up, So I guess this brings us to our next question. Do you think speaking Spanish is important for one to be considered Latino?
So that is such a controversial question. There's so many people who feel, I don't know why, because there's so many people who feel that in order to be considered Latino or Hispanic, you have to speak Spanish. And we've seen it, like recently, like you mentioned with the Jenna Ortega interview, where she had the interviewer tell her that she is Latina enough, because she's gotten that backlash. Because she doesn't speak it, it automatically makes her less than. We also have seen it going back to Selena, where the dad gave the speech where he says, that they're not Mexican enough for the Mexicans, and they have to be more American than the Americans. And, that's always been like a struggle that we've had and we faced in this country. Personally, I don't think that speaking the language makes you less Latino, because your genes don't lie, like genetics don't lie, and you still come from where you come from, whether or not you speak the language. And you can also embrace the culture in other ways. Like, while you may not speak Spanish or perfect Spanish, you might cook, all the Latino foods and all the tamales or the arroz con gandules, or, be a really good like salsa dancer or cumbia dancer. And that in itself is those are languages in itself. So I don't think that it makes you less than.
I completely agree with what you said, because it is such a controversy to certain people speaking the Spanish language. I also think it doesn't make you less than if you don't speak it. If that is your heritage, like you said, you can find connection with it in other ways. For example, like you said, in the foods that you eat, or in the music that you listen to, the soda that you like drinking, for example, Inca Cola, for any Inca Cola lovers out there. But also, I think it stems from colonization as well. This is something I mentioned in the podcast. Historically, Spanish is a colonized language. Unfortunately, we had, before they came and conquered the Latin countries, we had indigenous roots. There were tribes, we had a whole other culture. But, in modern times, eventually the language became the accepted way of speaking. But there are people that carry that trauma, especially within indigenous communities, that still exist in the Latin countries. For example, in Peru, like where my father's from, there's still people that, still follow the Incan ways or the Incan empires. They still speak Quechua, which is an indigenous language in Peru. And, they had to adapt to speaking Spanish. That was their only way of survival. So yeah, it goes definitely, 50-50. I definitely grew up learning Spanish from my mom. So I definitely picked up that Honduran accent. It was because I wanted to learn. I wanted to practice another language. I was like, Mommy, don't speak to me, in English, speak to me in Spanish, because even though there's a controversy to it, I noticed that by being able to speak it, I was able to connect with my family. I was able to deeply understand, the rest of my extended family, like
Mhm.
traveling. It is helpful, but again, there are pros and cons for speaking the language.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And going back to what you said, colonization is absolutely like a major aspect to a lot of these issues and the traumas that we've had and have been passed down for generations now. We're kind of very quick to invite people, like a white person, for example, that embraces Latino culture. We're quick to invite him to the carne asada, but when it's one of our own and they don't speak the perfect Spanish, then it's like, oh, like, why not? Like, then people begin judging. Like you said, you mentioned that it was a survival mode for the tribes to learn Spanish in order to sometimes live and remain alive because of colonization. And I feel like the same thing happened here in America too. A lot of like I said, I grew up in New York, so I grew up a lot around Puerto Ricans, and a lot of them were notorious for being like New Yorkers and not speaking Spanish, and that a lot of times was a way of survival because they didn't want, their families and their parents and grandparents had accents, and they didn't want their kids to be made fun of or to not get the job because now they also spoke with a Hispanic accent or they didn't speak proper English. Same thing in a lot of places in California, people that are just descendants of Mexico, or, like they didn't teach their kids Spanish because they wanted to assimilate. And, that's all survival mode. But once again, I go to circle back, like it doesn't make them like they're still Mexican or they're still Puerto Rican, like they still, genetics, like I said, don't lie.
It's very treacherous knowing that we have to suppress our roots and like just masquerade behind them. While the question was, is it important or for you to speak Spanish to be considered Latino? It is a controversial question. And that's why we ask it, because we need to bring it to the forefront that these are issues younger generations and the older generations, like these are the issues we're facing, and these are the issues that I'm seeing now. More and more parents really trying to like shelter their children from learning their native language of Spanish for the sake of, as you mentioned, not being bullied, being able to get maybe those top, executive jobs and stuff. It's very questionable. I think that we don't need to fit the mold, I guess, to fit in, when as we continue to stick together and like push the narrative. It's plain and simple, like we're here whether however you like us, speaking Spanish or not, and the list goes on and on. But absolutely, knowing other, areas of your culture, like your traditions, your famous dishes and dances and songs, all that, all the rhythm behind it. I mean, geographically, visiting your country every now and then, or other countries, that those are other ways as well to incorporate and stay in tune with, where you're from you're keeping those roots alive. I do think it's good to know, your native language, but I won't say that it makes you less than being a Latino.
Yeah, I mean, our parents immigrated to these countries not because they didn't love where they're from, but it was the land of opportunity, so it was something that was forced. I'm sure that no one wants to leave your family and, your friends and everything you've known to come here to have to learn another language that isn't yours and have to, live in a place, like, for example, New York is cold. I don't, like we come from some beautiful places. Like DR is beautiful year round. Puerto Rico is beautiful year round. Like, these places are paradise, and we leave those places to come for better opportunities for our families. And that comes with a lot of trials and tribulations. But also, I'm glad to see that I feel like now our generations have kind of started breaking those cycles. We've seen that viral video of I think it's Caso Cerrado, where the little girl Luna, yes, where Luna wants to speak in English, and she's like, "No, your name is Luna, not Moon." Like aquí se habla español. I think that it's great that we're starting to do that, and I know even in some households, parents force their kids to speak Spanish. And, in this house we speak Spanish, and outside, you speak English. So I actually love that. And, we're also trying to assimilate, or, kind of fit in, and we're as little kids and finding ourselves. So, like we might fight that, and we might not necessarily like that. But I think, in the grand scheme of things, it's super important. And language is the easiest way probably to connect. Being able to speak and understand someone, it's, you're able to connect with your roots and understand one another. So I think that's super important.
It all is very important. And I know we're going in terms of speaking Spanish, but one thing you mentioned is other ways that contribute to, still living in your Latin roots. And you mentioned salsa and traditional foods. All that sounds really good. I'm always up for it any day. But I wanted to ask you, given that it is Hispanic Heritage Month, how will you be celebrating?
Oh my gosh. So I am celebrating by just listening, just supporting other Latinos, especially Latino creatives. Like, coming on this podcast is like a great way to have these conversations, listening to other people's podcasts, whether it's like a financial podcast from Latinas, or like a comedy podcast that, a Latina or Latino has. I know that like Aida Rodriguez had like released a comedy special, and like, like watching that, because there's power in numbers. And if we, like, we mentioned that, so we're underrepresented within the media, even though the population of Latinos is so big here in America, and we don't get to tell our stories. Like the white corporate man at Netflix or Hulu, whoever, like they make those choices for us. But if they see that we can band together and there's money to be made, and our stories count, and we're equally as important as the next story, I think there's a lot of power in that. I think like that's one of the great things about like Bad Bunny and why he's so big, is that he never conformed to having to sing in English. And he's made big artists like Drake, for example. He made a song with him and he made him sing in Spanish, So I think like just supporting that during year round, but especially this month, I think is super important.
I love that. And support goes a long way. Please support your Latin community. We love that you are on this podcast, Kimmy. I have been following you for, I don't know, 8 to 10 years now, maybe even more. And it's kind of all a blur how we met. But I do know that we had that common interest of like media communications and reporting, and even the times in which I would reach out to you, a simple message of advice and tips. You were always very welcoming about that. I take note in all of that. And look, years later, I'm so happy. It amazes me that, you can be on this podcast and we're supporting one another, and we're continuing to support the remaining of Latinos that are whatever they're doing, whether it's a podcast, a song, they're writing, it doesn't matter. Support goes a long way, and we need to stick together and, represent. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
Absolutely. No,
I
thank you
agree.
for having me.
Let it ripple, guys. keep spreading.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. Thank you for coming on our show and, for putting Latinos in the forefront. There's definitely a lot of breaking of barriers that we are doing. Let us do more. Let us have these important conversations that we haven't really, been able to have, like with our own families. Let us keep reaching, as I say, for the stars, the moon, everything.
Agreed. Absolutely. Yes. Support is so important, and a little could go a long way.
We on our own, like our parents, like you said, they immigrated to the land of opportunity because in their own way, our parents were also breaking, their own generational cycles. And we're also doing it too. Every generation is going to break something and do something different that is going to cause some sort of controversy or some sort of effect that leads to a result in the end that brings connection and awareness around the world. Just to let us know, how may our listeners get in contact with you, or how can they reach you in media?
Well, like Jennifer said, I'm always willing and able to help anyone or answer any questions. So, like if you send me a DM, like I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, my handle's the same. It's simply my name, Kimmy Dole. Yeah, if you just shoot me a DM, I'd be happy to reach out.
Awesome.
Hey everyone, I'm Kimmy Dole and I am on Presente.
Is speaking Spanish important for one to be considered Latino? I think that it is important to connect with your roots. This question can be delicate for some. Respectfully, there are indigenous communities who actually still speak their tribal languages and due to colonization had to survive speaking Spanish. There are also parents who don't want their kids to be bullied for the fear that something could happen if their kids spoke the language, accepted in many Latino countries today. I grew up with no Sabo kids as well. I was one until I was corrected on my conjugation. As a kid, I grew up wanting to learn the Spanish language so that I can communicate with my other family members. And I don't know, as a kid, I thought it was pretty cool to be bilingual. I remember telling my mother that I didn't want her to speak English with me. I was like, no, 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 only Espanol. Growing up, I used to watch telenovelas, and that really helped improve my language. And taking classes again in high school helped expand my vocabulary. And in high school, I even took AP courses so that I could use it to my advantage when I started college. And it helped because when I started NYIT, I started off with 6 credits just because I took the AP courses in high school. Among the Latino community, there are other ways to connect to your roots. And learning what I understand about colonization, I understand the reason why some people choose not to learn the Spanish language. Because for some, it might result in trauma to learn that their past ancestors were killed by the Spaniards and forced to adapt to their language. So in relation to Jenny Ortega, which I love, by the way, she did a phenomenal job as Wednesday Addams, and of course, her big hit movie, Beetlejuice, and other projects she has been in. Girl, you have talent, and I hope to see you in many more roles. So this topic stemmed from this social media post that took place in 2023 at a fashion show in Paris. Jenny Ortega was put at the epicenter of social media for not being, quote unquote, Latina enough. According to BuzzFeed News, it mentions, that perhaps highlighting the reason why Jenny was or wasn't ever taught how to speak Spanish, it's noted that her relatives were told, not to speak their native language as American school children so that they don't stand out. However, I was reading something else where she realizes, or the actress realizes, that she does want to learn to be more connected to her roots because she realized, hey, I also want to have conversations, with my family. If anything, I think I can put myself in a place of understanding. To me, this is a powerful statement of what Latinos can branch into in terms of media and entertainment. Again, just by her being her heritage is representation enough for me. And while some of us have accents when we speak, I don't think that the industry should negate the fact that humans can be fourth dimensional. And as America Ferrera said, the roles out there exist and that they can be played by anyone who does or doesn't have an accent, I believe. Actors can play complex roles. It's just society likes to categorize us into neat little stereotypes. We're a different generation than that of our parents. We are the generation that our first language is English. And for most And our second language is that from our parents, the language, that they came here from, they taught to us. I think personally, ethnicity is beautiful because we have stories of old, we have culture, and even indigenous ancestry in our bloodline. We're a diverse community. There's a cosmic multitude to us. And while colonization is terrible, within us, within each of us, is a reformation of adapting to the language. Yet keeping in mind that you cannot erase our true origin stories. No matter the colonizers who quote unquote thought they won, I don't think they won. When the roots are deep within each of us, and we Latinos of today, we are living different experiences. Long ago, our ancestors were connected spiritually by the earth. And here we are breaking barriers to find the same spiritual connection with the earth by living or choosing to make changes in his story for those that get it. Like Beyonce said, take the pen and rewrite it.
My personal opinion is speaking and knowing and understanding Spanish is important. And metaphorically speaking, without physical weight, by speaking Spanish, you represent and carry your ancestry lineage. It amazes me how many languages there are in this world. And for many years, the human race exchanges in conversation and teaches one another when we speak. Now, while I do think it is important for Latinos to speak Spanish, I won't place emphasis that you must or you should speak Spanish to be considered Latino.
The Spanish language, a brief history for context. To keep things short and sweet, by this point, we know the Spanish language is a colonized one. Years ago, before Latin America became known in modern times, our cultures had other tribes before the Spaniards came, conquered the Latino countries we know today. Though this may be true factually, Latinos are also an imprint of the tribes who had customs and cultures before that. For we are the generations of our ancestors past, their struggles and reasons for fighting, so we can carry on today. Remembering that while past outcomes may have been tragic, we have seen the shine of our Latino communities today. In 2024, most people, or some people, don't identify with speaking the colonizer's language, and that is valid. Whether you grew up speaking Spanish or not, or a no sabo kid, we want to let you know that you are enough on this floating rock. We see you.